All right, so episode 8, the last one where we were doing the first documentation and creation of the user's endpoint, ended a bit abruptly when I needed to go help my wife and babies, but they're asleep now, so I'm going to continue on. So it was actually a pretty good stopping point. So we went from not having any API at all to both setting up our spec API documentation plus JSON API resources to give us and then configured both, and then set up a resource for user to have an endpoint for user. And what we're going to do now is see if we can quickly sort of blast through the rest of or as much as we can through the other resources. And we'll see how fast we can go. I go a little bit slower than I usually would talking all the time here, but we'll see how that goes. We'll pick up some sort of tips along the way, learn more about JSON API, learn more about documenting things. By the end, it'll feel a little repetitive, but for a while there will be some new things. And then once we've got that, I think maybe obviously not today, but I think that then we'll probably add in authentication and authorization into the API, probably in the next episodes. And at that point, we'll be ready to switch over to the client side and start building the client side app. I think we could do that before. We could do that before we added authentication and authorization pretty fine. And maybe we will. I don't know. But I think it probably makes sense to finish authentication authorization on the server first, just while we're in it. Then we'll switch over to Ember and write one client. Of course, you could write others, given that we've got a JSON API compliant server. Anyways, let's keep going. All right. So where were we? No, I ended abruptly. That's right. So I did not commit that code or push it up. So let's do that. That was a nice sort of stopping place. Okay, I didn't commit. This is not an award-winning commit message, but it's fine. It's fine. It'll be clear what the deal is. All right, so now we've got that up. So we haven't really quite finished the user model, so we're going to do that. Now, we've documented the create action. So I think what we're going to do is document the update. Let's see, maybe the get. Yeah, we'll do the post get of the index, get of the individual record, and then the update, and then that'll all be in our documentation. So, and again, this will go a little slow until, yeah, this will all go faster once we are on our second resource, but this is the first time, so let's not rush it. Okay, so we'll say get, and then v1 users ID. Okay. Now we need to, I actually do not remember if we need to set the parameter here or not. I think we just have to say let ID. Now here we are going to, I'm going to create an instance using our factory, and then we'll get that instance. So I'm going to say persisted user, and I'll use this later, just because sometimes we're going to need an attribute called user, because that's the syntax that JSON API uses. And it can get kind of annoying, frankly, if you later on are sort of switching between something like just user for a user and persisted user or user model or user instance or whatever. So I just always use persisted user just to, or persisted, model name in order to avoid that annoyance later. Okay. So we're going to see the ID is the persisted user ID. Now in JSON API, even an integer ID is a string because it supports all sorts of IDs, and that's the sort of formatting expectation is a string. It probably would work if you didn't have a string here, but if you don't, everything will expect IDs to be strings. So I'm going to do that consistently so I don't sort of confuse myself later when I see an error because it's an integer and it didn't expect it. Okay, so we can just start with this, right? See what it says. Oh, right. I have to name this. So we'll say get v1 users ID. Cool. So let's just take a look at what that created for the docs. I don't know that we'll do this every single time, but we'll do it at first. So now I've got the get and the post. Now, interestingly, these are not in the order. I thought that I had set that the order was supposed to stay the same. Let's take a look at where that was. Keep source order. Interesting. I'm not quite sure why this isn't taking it. It's not in this order. Perhaps that's a... Huh. Yeah, I wonder if that's because we're using API to me, because I don't think that RSpec API documentation is really used at all to render the docs. So the fact that I haven't used this initializer, I don't think would matter now. But let's find out. You know what? I mean, I talked about it before. The whole point of this is to learn something. Let's find out. I'm going to move this to an initializer then. I don't think I needed that, did I? So let's see if that does anything. I kind of don't think it's going to, but no. Yeah, so didn't keep the order. So we may have to read more about what to do about that, but it's fine. Okay, so here we've got get v1 user's ID. So shows the ID of whatever the user is that we're actually creating, so that's fine. There we go. Body's what I'd expect. So now I've got, it's great. I've got example of the get, example of the post. Now I think there's a question about, do we want the parameters to be listed on the get? I'm going to say no for now. I'm going to keep the parameters in the section where we're including them in the request body. You know, maybe we should repeat them, but I don't think so. I think that it's fine to have it this way. Okay, so let's go and add the other two, and I'm going to actually move this back into where it was before, because I think that's more normal seeming to me than having an initializer. I mean, I like initializers are fine. It just feels a little weird to have it for this when this seems like it should just be running in the context of running the specs. So I think it makes more sense over here. Okay, so we'll go back over here. So we've got the git on that. Now let's do the update. So updating is patch in JSON API if you look at the spec. So we're going to do patch v1 users ID. And now this, you can patch all of the same attributes. So I'm going to move these to a shared context. See if I remember that. Remember the syntax for this. So I think that I can just do this, or we're going to see. And I mean, I don't know why I don't just look at the documentation. I'm probably going to for RSpec. But this will allow us just to sort of repeat or just include the shared context in both the post and the patch. Be a little bit neater. There we go. So let's just take a quick look at RSpec shared context. Oh no, the Relish app, the specs for RSpec are down. Go figure. Boy, I wouldn't think you'd see that often. Well, let me pull up Dash and then I'll install the docs there. I don't think that I've got the RSpec docs, so. RSpec. Now, is this in core? I wonder if, well, maybe this includes all of them. I don't know. We'll see. Nope. So let's see. RSpec is RSpec core, RSpec expectations. I think those are the main ones. Maybe I'm missing one, but let's see if that does it. There we are. So shared context, aliased like that. And then I can say it behaves like, which I think is sort of weird. Yeah, include context and then the name. So there we go. That's what we're going to do. So now if I say here, include context, user parameters. Okay, cool. So that still works, right? So that's nice. We know that the refactor worked. And then when I go down and in the patch, I'll do that same thing, right? Include context, user parameters. Then I can, and then I'm going to do let persisted user and do the same thing as before. Okay. So now what I'll do is just change these parameters and check that the attributes were actually updated. Okay, or maybe I'll check that one was updated. It's really whatever you think is helpful to you. So I can do like let name, and I'll say my wife's name. Okay. And even that would be good, right? So this is patch Okay. And I can just check that the status is 200, and then I'll say that the user's, let's see, attributes name to equal name. Okay. Now we see a 400. I don't know why. Oh, I know why, because of the type. So we're going to go up here because the type is always the same, and we're going to set that up in the shared context. And there's no ID either, right? Yep. Okay. So we have to also set the ID. Resource object does not contain a key. What exactly does that mean? Let's check out the JSON API spec for a second. Okay, so that's creating. Let's look at updating. Okay. So it looks like we need to include the ID in the parameters also. And that's in the attribute. No, it's not in the attributes. So still the same thing. So we're going to take a look at a couple. We're going to do a little debugging, right, to see what the issue is. So we got a couple options. So we can take a look in the code in JSON API-resources. I can also look at what's being sent to the server to see if it's what I would expect. So well, it doesn't really matter which one we do first. Let's look at the logs. Okay, so I'm going to run that one, and we're going to watch the server logs. Okay, so all looks pretty fine, right? So it's posting to v1 users 53. Or it's patching rather. That's what we'd expect. It's got a data key inside the type, then attributes with name, and then the name we thought. ID is inside the data. Oh, wait, no, ID is not inside the data. Look right there, right? So that feels a little odd, doesn't it? So I think that I've done this before. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go and take a look at the JSON API resources code to see like why, where this is, what it's checking before it sets this, and then that'll be a good little learning experience anyhow. Oh, actually, I already think I have it open, don't I? I do. So we're going to search for that error. Missing key. Okay. Here we go. So as we thought, right? So it's going to raise that error if the ID in the data is nil, which is what it looked like the problem was back on that in the logs, right? It's because when we looked at the logs, we saw that the ID wasn't inside the data, which we thought it should be. So I think that let's do some fidgeting with this. Okay, so now that and that, they should match. And I have a feeling there may have been like a little bit of a collision there. So now, and maybe I should call this user ID. And then ID required true, but now it's parameters, so it should get set in the rest of the params, blah, blah, that seems fine. Aha, and now it's fine. So if we look at, yeah, if we look at the logs, we see the ID inside the data, which is what we expected. So, not that hard to track down, pretty straightforward. Well, now from now on, we'll go with this convention, right, which is users and then user ID. And then, again, we looked at the JSON API spec, and we know that for the updates, the ID has to be in the data, so we added that too. So good. Now, just a couple more times here, just until we're, we don't feel like doing it. I'll regenerate the docs. We'll just take a look and see that things look as we expect, especially since we moved to that shared context. We want to make sure it's sort of acting the way we expect. So now we see patch, get, and post. Again, I don't like the order. We'll figure that out eventually, but whatever for now. Yeah, so we see with patch, it adds ID is required. Post, it didn't. Rest is the same, seems fine. Yeah, so good. Good. So the only other action really on users, because I don't think we're going to enable destroy or delete, and that's interesting, right? Actually, that'll be a good thing for us to add here. In general, I sort of think it's bad luck to enable user records to be destroyed on apps. So we're not going to on this one, but let's implement the index, and then let's remove destroy from the list of methods that are supported on this. Okay, so for this one, why don't we'll create two users, right? So 2 times do. Just because we want to make sure that it's returning like we think it would be. All right, and then I'll say users equals JSON parse response body, and then expect users.size users data, there we go, dot size to equal 2. Cool, and it does. So, and again, just to make sure that that's working right, if I had changed this to 1 now, it fails. So I know that that's right. Okay, so that's what we would expect there. And now I want to, well, actually, this is a good one to TDD too. So let's say we wanted to add a test that we don't document and that tests that the method's not available. All right, let's just sort of figure out how we would do that. So in this case, we're going to want to say delete. Is it delete? Let me check. Yeah. Delete E1 users user ID. Okay. Heck. Okay. So now if I say example request delete E1 users. Now I'm not going to end up keeping it this way because I don't really want this in the documentation, but let's just, we'll figure it. We haven't used that syntax yet, so we'll use this one and then we'll go look at the documentation and get that right. So if I say expect status to equal 200, this will pass, I bet. I got a 204. What is 204? Oh, 204 is deleted, right? Duh. So if we go back, yeah, so if we do HTTP status 204, then you'll see that that is no content. And let's just check the spec for deleting a resource. And yep, it returns no content if it's deleted successfully. So that's what we'd expect if we were allowed to, but what if we didn't want to allow it? So let's go to our route and we're going to say except delete. I think that's the syntax, same as the rest of Rails. But let's make sure. So we're going to look in the controllers. I guess it's in the routes, isn't it? Only. It uses the same syntax as Rails, so I'm going to look. Resources, only and except. Yep. So if I say except delete here, I do not believe it should be succeeding anymore. There we go. So that's what I would expect. Now, I'm a bit stumped as to why that's allowing that. Doesn't seem like it should. Oh, it's destroy. Yeah, okay, geez. So there we go. Yeah, this is a good use of why the tests help. So I want to test then that, okay, I'm going to say example. We're going to use the different syntax now. And let's check out what the syntax is. So I'm going to look for do request because I know that's what it is. So, okay, I'm going to say expect do request to raise error action controller routing error. Aha, now that's working. So that's good. And that's nice and clear, right? It's nice and clear that this isn't allowed. And you know, when I always do that, no, but given that everything else will have this, I think it's helpful later to go, oh, right, I don't want the delete action available on users. So I've got that. Now, I think that there's a question about how do we want this in our documentation. I don't think we want to document things that don't exist, right? Or let's say we didn't want to, and maybe we change our mind. Let's take a look at how we skip documentation. Skip, no doc. Well, I guess we got to read through it. No doc, there we go. So no doc, and then pass a block. So and that's inside an example. Okay. Okay, so now let's generate the documentation and make sure that that looks as we'd expect, although there was a failure here. What is failing? Well, we've added a few things, so let's okay, so the error was with that no doc deal. We're gonna have to figure that out in a second. Well, obviously that's fine now because I commented it out. So I'm trying to decide what to do here. So I mean, the issue is going to be that it's when, let's take a look at the structure of what spits out of RSpec API documentation. And I think it'll be pretty clear what the issue is. Yeah, so it's spitting this example out. And again, I'm not positive why, because my guess is it's spitting it out because then whether or not it has the, you could make multiple requests and in this example and just no doc this single one. So let's just take a quick, we're gonna take like a 2-minute look through, see if it's obvious what, how to sort of skip this entire block. If it is, then we will. If it's not, we'll notice it later because I don't think that it's terribly important. All right. So I'm not seeing anything yet. Yeah, and I think the answer is that if you have the example, it's going to get output. If it has no docs, then it's going to throw an error. And I think that maybe that's hinting to us something. And I always pause at something like this instead of hacking into solutions. I'm like, okay, what is that probably telling me? And what it's probably telling me, and you could even see it from the error that we were testing for there, is that what I should create is a routing spec. Right? So let's take a look at what RSpec says for that if RSpec's documentation is working. RSpec routing spec. Well, Relish app still down. Well, we'll take a look here in this routing. Well, this is annoying because I don't typically write many routing specs, so let's look for of course, this Stack Overflow answer is pointing us to the broken docs, which is pretty funny. So you know what? We're going to skip this now because I don't remember the syntax offhand. I don't often write routing specs really ever, and it's not critical to what we're doing. So we can always get back to it. Okay, so we've basically got our entire user resource documented. Now we'll add some things as we add the other relationships, but it's in a pretty good spot, right? I mean, we can do everything. We can sort of CRUD it. It's JSON API compliant. Things are looking good. I think that the infrastructure for our documentation is good. So we're in a pretty good place. So I don't think I've got more than 20 minutes of energy left. So let's bang out a couple other resources. We'll see some new things doing that, and that'll be that. So I think we can go to our, here we go, to our GitHub issue, check off user. We've got these two done too, and get through the rest. So why don't we do organization next? That's really straightforward, and you'll see how quickly this will go. So we're going to go again from the spec in, and it'll look familiar, except we kind of just get to build on what we already did. Okay. All right, so we're going to first test that we can create it. Now this did not have organization. We're going to look at the model spec. Only has name in terms of attribute. It has some relationships, but we're not going to deal with those just yet. Okay. All right, and then we also have type. Okay, I'll say always organizations. Whoops. Okay, so let's see what it says. So I need to name the example. There's no route, right? So we're just going to go here. Now let's keep doing this, right? And it'll tell us what to do. Okay, right? So there's no resource. And again, I probably should use the generator, but I never do. That'll be another. You know what? What am I talking about? Let's take a look at what the generator documentation is. So JSON API resource and then the name. Okay. Oh, well, okay. So we're seeing that error because of this. Now I wonder if we can namespace in this. What do you think? Do you think if I do that, it'll do it? Yeah. Well, there we go. Good. Now I never write it that way, so I'm gonna go back to writing it myself. I always nest it. Okay. Okay, so in this one, we just want to test that it's creatable, updatable fields, and fetchable all just have name in it. So nothing much to this, right? Okay, so expected name got ID. Now, interesting. So that's another reason not to use that generator. Now I remember why I don't. So wrong number of arguments, 0 for 1. Okay, so we'll go back here and remember we've got to pass that context. Now I'm seeing empty. I expect name. Now it works. Okay. That's fine. Okay, so I think again, slightly questionable. Maybe we can dry this up, but it's also fine, right? So there we go. We're going to go back to our acceptance test. No controller. There we go. Now that works just fine. So we've got that, and we could just go and do the rest of it here, right? So we'll get v1 organizations organization ID. I should have done that before. That's sort of more consistent with how we're naming things. So I'm going to fix it just to be consistent. That was unexpected. I wonder if I have to keep it this way then for the, yeah, looks it. Well, okay, good to know. I'd have to look at how our spec API documentation is doing this bit. That's interesting to me that you have to name it in a sort of a Ruby syntax. That would make sense. I guess that's not that unexpected. Okay, and then we'll just change the name here. And we're going to create another one of those shared contexts. All right, so we're going to move these in. Oh, and I don't have to use that for get either. So this is actually premature, but that's okay. All right. All right, so that worked fine. And then so on and so forth. Now, like I said, this is sort of feels pretty monotonous. It gets much more interesting when we're actually adding more functionality to the controllers, which we'll do through the resource classes. But this basic setup is all relatively straightforward. So this one, we're going to check that it can set the name. So this, we'll make a shared context for this too. With a persisted organization. Yep. Now I can swap that in for this. That's interesting. I'm very surprised that there's a problem doing this. Oh. No, it should work fine. Yeah, but it doesn't. Oh, that's why. Okay, so you heard me pause on the audio here because I just knew that it seemed wrong, and that's why I need to include the context, and now it will work just fine. Okay, all is right with the world again. I can hear in my typing that I'm getting tired, so maybe this is yet another sign. Okay, so in this one, we're going to include both that context and the organization parameters because we're going to make an update. And then we are going to, if we remember from our users, so we need to add the ID. Let's just go check it out. So we're going to add the param ID. Now this suggests when you see yourself changing persisted user, persisted organization, that suggests maybe that a more conventional naming, well, it suggests a couple of things. One, you may go to like persisted record instead of the persisted organization, or we could use some simple meta programming to kind of like have the name work and just guess it and then use shared context across the various spec files. But again, maybe we'll do that at some point if it feels annoying doing this. Okay. And then we're going to let the name be like 2nd Street High School. So JSON parse response body, and then we'll just check to see that the name was updated. All right, so that looks good too. Now, I think that I'll show you one thing back in the docs, and I think it's fine. But something that you may want to take a look at how you want it on your project. So we're going to look at that endpoint. So now this is what it looks like to have two, right? So we've got our users, we've got our organizations. Now, I think this is a little weird in that if you look at the patch, it'll say that the attributes, attributes name is required. It's not actually true, right? This could be completely left off and that'd be fine. So that doesn't feel quite right. Maybe we'd have to think about maybe not including that, but whatever. It's okay for now. So let's get the rest of the organizations neatened up, which is just getting the index, right? And then these we can delete, so we will add that. That's interesting. So you know that number is going up every time, right? So it's 2, 4, 6. Now it's up to 8. Just not what we would expect. We'd expect that this would be getting sort of. I would expect that it would be getting cleaned every time or rolled back with a transaction. Let's move it inside to see if it changes. Well, that's interesting too. So I'm going to reset the server. So I end up using, every time this happens, I end up using database cleaner to, before every run, truncate the database. I'm a little stumped as to why those instances wouldn't be getting rolled back, but I suspect that the reason is what we just did when we moved it inside the example request. So that's interesting too, isn't it? So the interesting bit is that I would think that, oh, I suppose that it has to exist before that, right? Because it's making the request right here. I wonder on the user side why we didn't see that problem. Right. All right, well, there we go. So not my shining moment of remembering things there. So now it works. We put it in a before block. And all is right again. Okay, so now we just have the delete and that's it. Okay. So let's take a look at that JSON API spec again and see what's needed on deleting. So I just need to send it to that. Now, so it says no route matches delete for organization. Okay, that's the hint. I mistyped that. So let's try again. There we go. So 204, so that worked fine. Just quick generate the docs, take a look. And then I'm gonna create one more resource, which is for membership, because then we deal with relationships, which is like one last little new thing. And that'll be kind of interesting to see. All right, so that's what we'd expect. Okay, so you keep seeing this file is automatically generated, blah, blah, blah. You can quick just hack this a bit. Right, so we'll say like API readme. Okay. So we'll fix that up when we get to it. Okay. So let's just add the memberships quick, just to get a sense for what the difference is when you deal with relationships. And that'll be it for today, I think. It's going to go back and get that guy checked off. Okay, so with a membership, so let's take a look at our membership spec. So membership belongs to a user, it belongs to an organization. That's all there is to it. So we create one. It doesn't have any attributes, but it does have those relationships, and they're required. So we need to do that. We haven't done that yet, but it's straightforward. So we'll post to memberships. Okay, and this we're going to have shared contact, or no, not shared contacts. We're going to have the parameter, and the first one's going to be the user. That's going to be required, and it's going to be scoped to the relationships key. Whoops. Okay, and this is the user of the membership. And then what this looks like is it's, I'll show you on JSON API, and you should get in the habit of, until you're used to what JSON API's standard looks like. If you ever need to take a look, just go check this out. So creating resources. So you can see when you create a relationship, the name of the relationship is going to be a key in that object, and then you're going to have another key. So that's going to be an object, and that's going to have a data key, and then in there's going to be the value for that is going to be an object with a type key and an ID key. And remember, that's really the ID, so to speak. The unique identifier is the combination of type and ID. So that's what the value of user needs to be, right? Is data, and then type users, and then ID, and we'll have persisted user.id.2s. We're going to need that. Okay. And then we're going to repeat the same thing for the organization. This one's required, and it's really identical in its setup. Okay. Okay, so got that. Now we're going to need, like always, we need the parameter type. And this is always memberships for this one, not polymorphic. Okay. All right, so we're going to post this to memberships, and then cool. So no route matches. So we'll just do the same chase. Now, this is going to be slightly different than the last one because we've got relationships and we hadn't done that before. So, but not all that different. Okay, so creatable fields will have user, and we will have organization. All right. Hope if I didn't have a typo there. All right. So let's go fix that. So to set up the relationships, we're going to say has one, and I know that's different than the what you're used to with Rails because this is a belongs to relationship, but with JSON API, there's no difference between the two. And has one, there are two ways to write this in JSON API resources, the gem. This is the one I'm going to use. So has one user and has one organization. And now it's all fine. Now, I think that there's a question about if we want to be able to update this. It sort of feels like a weird idea to me. I mean, we may want to be able to update a membership, but being able to update user and organization feels questionable. It feels like that's something we do not want to allow. And I think that there are two ways you can go about this one. So way one is that we could make these not updatable in the resource. Way two is that we could handle it in the policy, which we haven't made yet, the authorization policy, to say, hey, this isn't updatable if. And way three would be in the model itself. We could say that a model isn't valid if we've changed the user or the organization of the membership. Now, I think that there are pretty decent arguments about any of them. You know, where you want to do it. I think because it plays nicer with clients, we're not going to. I think we're not going to do it at the resource level. So then that brings us to policies, which we don't have yet, which we'll use for authorization. Or do we want to validate in the model that we haven't changed this? And I think that's probably the friendliest way. I think that it's going to result in errors that make the most sense. I think that they're going to be the friendliest in various client interfaces. I think that it is. That's sort of the nature of it. So let's just quick go do that. You know, so this is in membership, right? So we want to say that a membership validates that its user and organization hasn't changed, right? So it validates that the user has not changed. Okay, so we'll say subject equals girl.create membership, and then subject.user equals user new, subject val. Okay, something like this. Now this says that valid. Okay, we haven't used this before, so that means we need to create a factory here, and we're going to say association user strategy build. And this is, we talked about this before, but the idea here is that you only want it to persist the instance if it needs to, and that's what strategy build does. So now, okay, now we see what we wanted. So we thought the error should include cannot be changed, but it doesn't include any because we haven't added that yet. So let's do that. Now, let's start with this. I think we may refactor this in a second, but we'll say return if well, you know what? I'm just going to do it this way from the beginning. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to skip over if this isn't persisted, right? Because yeah, otherwise, you know, what does that even mean? And then we're just going to say if user changed or organization changed. Now, that's going to make for ugly errors, so we're going to do it this way. Okay, so we'll say, and let's look up the dirty changes. Yeah. So we can just look in the keys for this. if changes, we can say key, right? Key. Well, that's not what I expected. Let's figure out why. I just want to run this one spec, not all of them. So okay. Oh, it's not persisted. Does it continue? Okay, this is the second time around. So now it's persisted. All right, so now I should not have said continue. I should have said next. So here we go. Now we'll continue the first time. Now we'll say next. Try again. Okay, next. Oh, okay. There we go. So it's not the user here. I got mixed up thinking in JSON API land. It's user ID, which is pretty obvious that that's what it'd be. But here we go. So I'd like to keep these because I want to set the error on user. I don't know. That's a tough call. I think I'm going to keep it. I'm going to do it that way. Oh, damn. Yeah, Atom and Bybug do not play nicely together, so instant regret. Instant regret. There we go. Now that worked. And then I'll just basically copy this spec and make it for organization. Bingo. Okay, so back to where we were with this. So no controller. Just notice my typo there. Boy, I am having trouble with the typing. All right, there we go. We got our 201, which is what I should have expected. And you see that, so that's the deal with relationships, and now we'll take a look at what it looks like on the JSON API side. And I'm 15 minutes past being a pumpkin, so it's going to be it for me. There we go. So post, relationships, user, organization. Looks like what you'd imagine from what we looked at before. Get back the relationships now with the user that's got both the links and the data for each, and we'll get into these a little bit More later, but good. So now that we've done that, we can take a look at, go back to our resource and say, okay, hey, it'd be nice if our user resource included has many memberships, right? That'd be nice. But I don't want to be able to create these because that doesn't make sense really for this type of relationship. So I want the creatable fields to not include it, but I want the fetchable fields to include it. So I'm going to add it to here, but I don't want it in there. Let's see what happens here. So we need to exclude it from our creatable. So we do need to add, we need to implement that method then. So we're going to do super minus memberships. Okay, and that should be fine. There we go. So now we've defined that relationship for the resource. Now again, you don't have to have, just because the model has it, you don't have to have it in the API. And yeah, it's a little bit more work, but it's nice to have that control. Got that tested right. So if I go and rebuild the docs, we take a look, now we'll see what that looks like. And the reason I'm going to do this is the sort of thing where, here, interesting. So I thought that I would see the relationships here. I didn't expect that. There we go. Okay, I hadn't reloaded the page. That makes sense. So there we go. So we'll see with the relationships to memberships, it just is a link. So we get the links of this. And if we wanted to include them in the response, we'll go through how to do that a different day. But that's what I expected. And that's the sort of minimum requirement if I've said that I want to include the memberships relationship in the response. Okay, so that looks good. I'm just going to do the same thing for organization real quickly while I'm thinking of it. Right, so I want to have memberships here. Okay. Okay, so that's passed. Now I'll do the rest, and these are going to fail. And that's because I need well, that is not what I intended to do. Okay. So there we go. Now that's going to be there too. And I don't need to test in the API that it shows up to, right? Because we can count on JSON API-resources to do its job. It's well tested, and if it breaks, it's going to break for everyone. So we'll quick run the tests here, and that looks good. And run the docs. Now, have I been? Oh, that's annoying. So I've been adding the docs to the repo, which I did not want to do. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to add this as its own commit. I should have done it before. Add, because we don't want every time this changes to have to update the repo, at least. Not now, and I think we're gonna do it a different way. So okay. All right. Cool. So I think that we can commit this then. So this is what add resources and documentation for user. Let's see, rest of user, organization, and membership. Excellent. Go back up here. So now we're through this. So it'll take us maybe an hour and a half to get through these while talking and while having everything documented, everything tested, and doing a good job of it all. And then we'll have a basic API for the app. It's not going to have integrated yet the authentication or authorization, and maybe we'll do that then. But we're clipping along and pretty low stress, and hopefully you're picking up sort of the details on how to do this yourself too. So switch back to me to say goodbye. So anyways, thanks for following along with me. We'll get back to it next time.